Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Pitt, Season 1, Episode 6? Am I on 6? I think it's 6. Yeah, 6. 12 p.m. is the episode in question. This is a Patreon-sponsored review, so thank you very much to Alison for picking the show. And this one felt like it, backseated, half the characters. And not because, and I only feel that way because I feel like a lot of characters that I was talking about in the last couple just have like a little scene or a little touch up here or there to kind of like pay off little things, as opposed to them having like full on plots themselves. That's kind of how I felt. Obviously, we ended last one with the pregnant girl's mother showing up and that being a kerfuffle. In fact, this episode ends with that plot as well, because this episode ends with her and the aunt screaming at each other and getting ready to go into a boxing match. Collins gets pushed aside. I really thought they were going to do the thing where she gets pushed to the floor and she was going to be concerned about her pregnancy. They didn't do that though. She just kind of pushed back a little bit, and the episode ends with her yelling, "That's enough." So that's the dramatic point we end on for this episode. So obviously that's there. That's sprinkling throughout. The mother is adamant that the girl's not going to have the abortion. The aunt thinks it should be her choice. They have a bit of a fight early on. Robbie overhears and comes in and kind of takes the aunt away and says that, the mother and daughter should have a private conversation about this. And ultimately, it's a bit of a stalemate, fundamentally. And the daughter's not happy that she's not been let to do this. And it's almost kind of stalling as the mother's trying to take her away out of the building. Going into the bathroom to vomit and things like that. And that's where the kerfuffle at the end happens. I guess the only notable thing, because we talked about this plot a lot last time and the ethics of it and all that, but the one thing that kind of, I guess, sticks out a little bit is when Collins is commiserating how this is played out, Robbie kind of throws in a little dig where he's like, if you had just went with the other doctor's readings to begin with, she'd have been discharged before the mother ever got here. If she hadn't stopped and questioned the readings and they had to have that debate about Robbie stepping in to take the risk to sort of falsify them a little bit so they could let the girl get the treatment. If she just went with the initial readings up front and didn't question them, they would have already started the process and the mother would have been too late. Which, well, technically he's right, he's accurate. It did kind of feel like a little bit of a dig at Collins, and Collins kind of gives him a look kind of accordingly, a little offended at the suggestion that he's making. Otherwise, they were on kind of good terms up until that point. She's checking out he's still, there's a little bit more follow-up with his backstory and his mentor that he lost. We find out that's who died a few years ago. We knew it was another doctor. I don't know if we necessarily got that it was his mentor specifically until this episode, because the widow of the mentor sends in a big lunch for all the staff every year on this anniversary, and he kind of gets a bit of a ghostly look in his face when he sees the card that came with the lunch, and just kind of leaves the room. And they kind of explain it to Whittaker and some of the other younger ones what the hell the reaction was about. But I guess the big thing this episode for me, there's some funny subplots, right? And I do mean that. There's some funny subplots. We've got a botched ass job, which is a very weird sentence to say. I guess we'll call it a DIY silicone injection has gone wrong. Because of course it did. Not that the woman... There's a young woman who's we just cut to... We don't even get any introduction. We don't get any context. The first thing we see of this little case, and it's only one scene, we just cut to this woman's weird looking ass, right? And there's clearly something not quite right, because it was looking kind of lumpy and weird, and the woman's kind of crying and saying what's wrong or whatever. And we find out that she got silicone injections in her ass, but she didn't go to a hospital to get a treatment done. She went to someone who was on TikTok, and he did it in his living room. Apparently with stuff that he got at a hardware store or something. I'm look, I believe that some idiots tried this. This does not feel unbelievable to me, but I also, at the same time, I'm shocked at the stupidity of the human race. There's just, I'm not surprised, because I know there's people that are that dumb. It's not a surprising story, but at the same time, it wouldn't shock me if this is specifically based on something. Someone read this story in a paper or something, or or saw a news article about it online and said, we have to put that in the show. I mean, hell, half the little medical cases in this are probably based on little things like that, right? You know, just stuff that the writers have seen in passing. Maybe they've intentionally went out of their way to look for weird cases to throw into the show as little side cases or gags or whatever it is. But it was funny. You know, it was a funny little bit. I'm sure we'll come back to her and her weird ass. I mean, hell, Samira, who's the doctor dealing with, and this is kind of Samira's only scene of the episode, more or less, barring any little things like she does, is she is asked by the patient, does it look bad? And she's like, well, I'm not going to lie, it doesn't look good. I mean, I guess it's notable that her and Robbie have a little moment where Robbie kind of says good job and gives her a fist pump, which she doesn't really, she didn't really know how to take the fist bump. She's kind of like, oh, I guess I'm doing better in his eyes, kind of thing. But it's showing a bit of growth. He's trying to be positive after chewing her out earlier on the day, of course. The other funny little subplot is, so we had one ass that went wrong. Now we also have testicles that went wrong. Although this one's more of just an accidental mystery. You know, nothing specifically that I mean, as far as we know, maybe he was up to something weirdly kinky, and that's what's caused this. But Collins has a little case where this young guy, this teenager, his testicle has become twisted and the blood flow's cut off. I'm sure there was a more technical term for it, but that was the gist of it. And it was like, we just have to twist it back into place. And also some minor follow-up surgery just to kind of lock it in, as it were. But it's potentially serious. Like, if this doesn't get treated quite quickly, you're going to lose the testicle, which, I guess the most notable thing about this scene, other than just the hilarity of him reacting and being a little uncomfortable that this, older woman is doing all this stuff. He asked for a man at one point, is notably the mother is very receptive to Collins, and it does seem to be largely based on the fact that it's a black woman. Collins is black, and this woman kind of like immediately says, "Oh, this great, beautiful black doctor is helping my son," and she even says, "Hey, can we become your patients full time afterwards?" And Collins is like, "No, I work in like the ER. I don't really work in that type of medicine." And she's like, "Oh, whenever you get your own office and you start doing that, you let us know. We want to be your patients." It was kind of just a sweet, funny story, right? Because you've got the mum kind of being really enthusiastic about Collins. The idea that there's a black woman doctor who's helping her son is really kind of like sweet that she has this reaction to it. But she's also funny because she's like, "Wait, I'm taking that lock off your door. What were you doing with your balls?" So there's amusing stuff sprinkled throughout it to keep it entertaining. So. Like, yeah, these are all just sort of little plots. So there's a guy that comes in as well that fell off a ladder, and there's some stuff with that. I mean, the main thing, though, I think about this episode, there's two main things, really, I guess, is one, Robbie feeling the pressure from up high because they want to do this merger with a different department because they want more profit, and like part of it is he needs to get the patient satisfaction up. So he gives everyone a little speech about their bedside manner and doing this and that and whatever. So that's an element of frustration for him as the day is going on. But he's still dealing with the parents of the young man who died. They kind of see basically the woman who kind of comes in and sort of gives them like family help, gives them the advice and talks about the next steps and all that. And there's kind of an emotional scene there where they kind of reminisce about what a good baby he was and things like that. But then the mother gets very upset again when they point out that their son had an organ donor clause in his driving license, and the mother kind of freaks out and leaves and demands that, "No, this is my son, he was too young to make that choice," and storms out, which has been a kind of a recurring theme of these last couple of episodes, is the idea of like a parent's choices for their kids and a kid's choices for their parents when they're older. Like, that's definitely been a big part of these last few episodes. So that's going on one side. I think the other thing for me, though, is that all the young characters in this episode, we kind of I feel like this is the first time we've seen all four of them interact together in a while, maybe since even episode 1. It felt like they all kind of converged, but most notably, King's kind of separate from the other three in this particular thing I'm about to talk about, but Santos finally really screws up in this episode. She has a monumental screw up which obviously she's been giving Whitaker a hard time for having to change his scrubs and getting covered in stuff. She's been giving Javadi a hard time for fainting, and there's been a lot of digs coming from her direction. And they keep playing up as well that there's this, the other doctor that's been coming around, Garcia, I think her name is. She's not in the first 20 of the cast list, so I can't see her right now, but I think they were saying Garcia. And that's the one that seems to be kind of flirting with Santos and kind of giving her, like, not special treatment, but just sort of saying things like, oh, you're in good hands, and, like, throwing her a smile, just little flirtations. Others are noticing. They're definitely noticing a little bit of this. But she ends up on her bad side. Santos gets excited at the prospect of doing a tube in to breathe. She's like so excited about doing this that she's giddy about it. She says, "Can I do it?" And they say, "Sure, I'll talk you through it." And then when she's cutting the flesh, she's cutting the skin to make the incision, she drops the scalpel into Garcia's foot. So there's a lot of like comedy this episode. This was definitely funny. Obviously Garcia was pissed, and Santos is instantly apologizing, is horrified, and then you feel kind of bad for her because then everyone else sort of says, no, like, we'll continue this without you, and they even get Whitaker to come in and do some of it as well to add a little bit of insult. So Whitaker's the one that witnesses this out of the young characters. He's the one that sees this hiccup happen, if you will. So the result of this is a couple of things. One, like, obviously Garcia is not being as flirty anymore and is like dressing her own wound, and they do bring up this idea of like, hey, we should probably check you for a bunch of different things because like the patient's blood was on that blade, so you have to check for HIV and other things like that. And that scene is one thing, right? And like the mood's a little bit more rough than it used to be. I think the other thing, though, that is way more satisfying is when the other characters find out about this. When Whitaker's standing around with Javadi, and Javadi notices that she's not in a great mood, and Whitaker's about to tell the story as to what happened, and Santos is like, "Don't you say another word," and kind of threatens him, not in like a super serious way, but like in a kind of like, "No, I will kill you if you say a word." And then they kind of keep prodding. And very quickly Santos just kind of like throws her hands up and says, "Okay, fine, right? I accidentally impaled Garcia's foot with the scalpel, and Whitaker had to help take over." And it's kind of it's comeuppance feels like maybe a strong term for this, but it's she's been the one who's been super cocky, as which is what Garcia points out as well, that there's a fine line between cocky and being confident, and she's kind of over that line, and she's been rubbing her relative success in the others' faces throughout the day, and it kind of felt really satisfying to see Javadi and Whitaker kind of like smirk at each other and enjoy her getting a little bit of just desserts, to the point where Whitaker even throws over to Javadi and says, "I think that's worse than fainting." And then Santos, feeling kind of butthurt about it, says, "Well, you got a patient killed," and which is a low blow because he technically did not. He got unlucky. But it's almost like they were just kind of recapping what they've done today so far in a lot of ways, and that's kind of nice. And speaking of Javadi, there's a nice little follow up to what happened with her and Mackay last episode, where Mackay kind of got in her face a little bit and Javadi overstepped with the advice for the homeless woman. Where she's, first of all, she tries to bring that up and apologize for it, and Mackay's kind of calmed down now, so she says, like, "Don't worry about it, whatever." But the payoff to it, where they kind of bond a little bit again, where we kind of humanize Javadi a little, is Javadi's mother shows up, right? And she's down here to see a specific patient, and basically kind of ropes in her daughter as well as Whitaker to come and kind of watch the like what she's going to do. And she's like, "Hey, young man," because a young patient. She's like, "Hey, these are some students here. Could you mind if I teach while I'm checking you and whatnot?" And he's like, "Yeah, go ahead." And he's playing his Steam Deck or whatever he's doing. He's not even paying attention. And basically, Javadi's mother starts like doing quizzes and starts like saying, "Hey, can you tell me about this?" And she keeps looking over at Javadi, expecting her to answer, but Whitaker keeps being the one that chimes in. Sometimes after a little bit of awkward silence. And it gets to the point where Javadi's mother says, we've talked about this at home. You should know this. And to be fair, like Javari's mother is absolutely in the wrong here. Like this is uncomfortable for anyone. There's a reason why you're not supposed to work with your own parents. It's this, especially in this context where she's trying to, like, I don't know, pull the mum / teacher card at the same time, and it's uncomfortable. It's awkward. And the kind of the relationship between Mackay and Javari is kind of like mended a little bit because Mackay goes out of her way to like bail her out of this situation. She pretends to get a phone call and says that their patient's having chest pains and they have to run off. But she made up a patient. There was no one that existed. And she points out that Javari looked like her son when she's yelling like advice from the side of the basketball court. And she's laughing as she says it and she walks off. And it's kind of a nice moment. It humanizes Javari a little bit, who has been a little uptight, a little bit kind of, you know, like she's always been well intentioned. I've been saying that since like basically episode 1, but kind of maybe doesn't have the real world experience to give the advice or to interject in the ways that make sense. Here, this was like, yeah, but there's still very human things about her. She still has her own bullshit she has to put up with, and this pressure from her mum is maybe very different to what some other like teenagers and kids go through, but it's still a very real human thing. And it's like, for the first time, it feels like Mackay found something to really kind of latch onto and recognize and, you know, give a helping hand. And probably felt like she should give her a helping hand since she's the one who kind of almost like because Javari tries to argue she can't go to the other room with her mum because she's got to go deal with patients, and Mackay basically jumps in and says, no, we can go. In fact, I'll come too. Maybe I'll learn something new, even though I'm, you know, I've been a working doctor for years and I'm in my 40s or whatever. But she kind of like puts her in the situation, and then when she sees just how traumatizing is a strong word, but when she sees the look on her face during this moment where her mum's starting to grill her about knowing stuff and seemingly is disappointed. And for the record, I think I'm willing to bet that Javari knows the answer to every single thing she's asking. Maybe she doesn't, but I think she probably does, and she just doesn't want to perform on command because it's kind of embarrassing. So Whittaker's just jumping in. I mean, you can tell though by like the third response that Whittaker's realizing that he's kind of, you know, he's kind of stepping in, and he's realizing that he's answering correctly to begin with because he's been asked, but then he realizes that, oh, I'm not the one that's supposed to be answering here. She's wanting her to answer. I'm just getting in the way. Also, he's in the right color of scrubs, but the wrong size. They bring that up here. As far as anything else in the episode, we have the conclusion to the ambulance stuff, because we actually get the drivers of the ambulance, the thieves, the culprits. They come to the hospital after they've crashed, and they are college frat boys. One was a pledge who was supposed to take the ambulance to the campus, but they freaked out when the cops started chasing after them, and it led to the chase and the inevitable crash. Not too much to say on that, honestly. Obviously, there's some jokes about the bets that were going on. Collins wins, but got really close outside of them being meth addicts, which was incorrect, but everything else seemed to be on point. And she's probably going to use that to buy a fancy pram for her baby. Or sorry, stroller for the Americans. I'm usually good at like switching to the American word for certain things just because I know like most of the viewers are American, but that's one that just it doesn't come up often enough for my brain to process it right away. There's lots of little interactions in here. There's a moment, for example, where Dana kind of comes in and saves Robbie when he's basically about to get into like a fight. Not like a physical fight, but like he's getting into like a fight with his boss about this potential like change in the organization. And he's really starting to argue his case about how it's all about greed and you don't give us the help we're supposed to get. And it's getting kind of heated. And Dana kind of comes in and says, hey, you've got some patient stuff to do, and kind of pulls him away. You know, there's a lot of people looking out for someone else in the episode. I mean, there's also people accidentally stabbing others in the episode, which is a hazard. You know, it's... You know, obviously, I think Garcia comes out a bit of a badass because she finishes doing what she's doing in the surgery, even though she's got a scalpel sticking out of her foot. So, you know, it's the sort of thing like when the reaction happened, like I almost missed the moment because I looked away for a second, and then of course the you know, like I went back and I'm like, oh, it fell on her foot. That's what I missed. So, like, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of jumping around. There's little updates and lots of little plots that have been happening. For example, the mother of the kid who ran away, who might be going to do something dangerous, who's got the hit list. Robbie talks to her again. Mackay's still very passionate about they do something about this. Maybe she should get some like professional help here because she basically made herself sick to come to the hospital. And he talks to her. She's still not heard from the son. Like, this is the thing about this show that I'm realizing is that sometimes they want to update us or remind us of certain plot lines because we're going to be getting to them in a big way later, presumably. But there's not much yet to deal with, so there's not like much to this storyline in this episode. It's like a little reminder. It's just a little bit of, hey, keep this in your brain. This is going to come back. There's not much advancement here. Perhaps the more interesting part of it, or the more important part of it, is that Robbie is ready to just let it go because he's getting run down, he's tired, he's dealing with all these patients, he's dealing with these demands from on high. He doesn't have the bandwidth necessarily for it anymore until Mackay really kind of prods him about it, and then he makes the choice to sit down with this woman and make the effort still. It's not that he doesn't want to make the effort. Like, deep down, I think he knows he should, and we see that throughout, where, later on with the parents of the young man that died, he's about to leave the room and they say, hey, can you stay with us during this meeting? And he does so. Like, he's constantly doing the right thing. It's just that obviously he's been pulled in so many directions constantly throughout the episode that there's definitely times where it feels like he wants to let the stress of it just, sort of win a fight and let something go. But then ultimately, it kind of shows that he's a good person because he ultimately doesn't every time. Like, every time someone says something needs to be done or someone needs help, he even dances with the old lady whose daughter abandoned her, which is another little plot line that is just kind of... It's got a couple of quick scenes. There's a couple of quick conversations about trying to contact the daughter. The social services lady comes down and is like, hey, this is what the situation is. We'll have to try and see how it develops. And that's kind of it. But there is a nice little scene where Robbie gives her the dance that he promised, and he just kind of like wheels her out of the scene, and it's just a nice little pleasant moment. So, it's kind of an episode of a lot of little bits. There's a lot of little advancements and a lot of plots. There's people still in the waiting room. There's some things coming to a head, but ultimately it's not one I think has the biggest through line compared to some of the other episodes. There's definitely some thematic things that are connecting the plots. We still have these themes, like I said, of parents making decisions for the kids, and should the kids make their own decisions. There's still a lot of that going on, and even the daughter who's abandoned her old mother still kind of fits into the theme of, parents and their kids, just in a very different part of the life cycle, if you will. So there's a lot of things going on like that, but this was an entertaining episode, I think, more than it felt like a big dramatic episode, although it definitely kept some things bubbling for each of the characters. And I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me more than anything was the payoff to Santos being a dick to the other young characters and them getting to have a little bit of a laugh at her expense because she finally screwed up. And she kind of needed to be put in her place a little bit, and relatively speaking. So, no, that's my feelings on this episode of The Pitt. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. You can like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can support the channel over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or via YouTube membership and get bonuses, and just make sure all the reviews keep coming. Thank you to everyone who already supports us. That's been the review. Thank you very much once again. We'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?